Hello and welcome. This class is designed to help investment advisor representatives understand and comply with the Continuing Education Model Rule created by NASAA, the North American Securities Administrators Association. I'm Andrew Gluck, editor of Advisors for Advisors. Our goal over the next 51 minutes is simple, even though the topic is not. We're going to make IAR continuing education rules clear. You should walk away from this class knowing the exact deadlines for earning IAR CE credit and the practical implications of the 600% increase in ethics training imposed on CFPs and 300% increase for CPAs. My team and I have produced more than 1,000 hours of CE and CPE approved by CFP Board, NASAA, and IWI since October 2008, and I've produced over 25 hours of NASA-approved IAR CE in the past year. I'm going to give you an insider's perspective on features and parameters for selecting IAR CE programs. My goal is to make you walk away with a practical understanding of what you need to know to earn your IAR CE without any drama, and to make you excited about the learning experience. Okay, here we go. The last few years have brought a sweeping regulatory shift to financial advisors and consumers. At a time of fierce resistance to federal government regulation, state regulation of IAR CE has expanded dramatically. Until 2022, mandatory continuing education for IAR simply did not exist. There were respected professional credentials that demanded ongoing education, like the CPA, CFP, and CIMA certifications, but a state-registered advisor could go for decades without no requirement to update their skills, review ethics rules, or even learn about new regulations. In January 2022, that all began to change. That's when NASAA's Model Continuing Education Rule became effective in Maryland, Vermont, and Mississippi. From that three-state beginning, the rule spread rapidly, very rapidly. By 2025, more than 20 jurisdictions had adopted NASAA's model rule. Publicly available data on IAR registrants from the states operating under the model rule show more than 200,000 advisors were subject to the rule in 2025. That's more than half the IA reps in the nation. Put another way, NASAA's model rule now protects nearly half of the American population. What makes this enormous regulatory shift especially impactful is not only the number of states that adopted NASAA's CE framework, but the significant investor protection it has put in place. For decades, investor protection advocates noted that financial advisors handle people's life savings and are pivotal in a consumer's most consequential financial decisions. Yet, unlike other licensed professionals, federally and state-registered IARs faced no obligation ever to revisit ethics or technical knowledge after they passed a Series 65 or Series 66 exam once upon a time, perhaps long ago. Consumers assume that government-regulated advisors must be required to stay current with industry best practices and changing ethics rules. An advisor registered with the SEC or a state securities regulator had to know what they're doing, right? After all, that's how it works with doctors, lawyers, and accountants. Of course, the reality was starkly different. An advisor could pass their licensing exam once, decades ago, and never again be required to demonstrate updated knowledge. As a result, the gap between public expectations and regulatory reality was enormous, and that situation's persisted for generations. For decades, anyone could hang a shingle saying they were a financial planner, personal CFO, or an investment advisor registered to operate with the SEC or state securities department and face no ongoing knowledge requirements. Zero. The system offered no minimum standard, assuring consumers advisors were staying current on financial products and practice techniques and knew how to behave ethically. There was no requirement for IARs to stay up to date about advising individuals on investing their life savings. NASAA's Model CE rule changed all that. With a structure that is simple yet rigorous, the IAR CE program establishes an annual baseline and requires that proof be stored in a system regulators can see. To understand why this matters, it helps to know what NASAA is and I is not. NASAA is a century-old association of U.S. state and Canadian provincial securities regulators. It does not regulate you directly. Instead, it drafts model rules that states can choose to adopt. When a state enacts the NASAA CE model, the rule becomes part of that state's law. NASA then maintains a handbook that operationalizes the model with definitions, processes, and updates to keep the program current. Think of it as a plug-and-play system states can use to manage regulation of state-registered investment advisor representatives and RIAs. Above the states sits the SEC, which is responsible for federally registered advisors. Understanding this regulatory structure is essential because it shows how different agencies work together to protect investors. The system creates layers of oversight, with each organization playing a specific role in maintaining standards and enforcing compliance across the financial services industry. Along with the SEC is FINRA, which supervises broker-dealers and registered representatives. NASA coordinates the state agencies that license and examine smaller RI, as with less than $100 million under management, and their IA reps. The state securities regulators are usually under the control of state attorneys general. Together, these bodies regulate the landscape you work within every day. Adoption of NASA models can happen quickly when states see value, and that is exactly what occurred. In a short period, state after state concluded that NASA's uniform continuing education requirement would raise standards, reduce investor harm, and align more closely with consumer expectations of financial professionals. The change came swiftly and was sweeping. Ironically, it's made zero headlines. To be clear, the massive upgrade in U.S. financial consumer protection has been completely absent from the world's leading financial press outlets. To appreciate the significance of the change, consider how lightly regulated the profession had been. Unlike CPAs, CFPs, and CIMAs, each bound to fulfill ongoing professional education requirements, state-registered investment advisors have always operated with no mandatory post-licensing education requirement. Many IA reps went decades without any structured learning. NASA's rule changed all that overnight. It has closed a gap in public trust that had long concerned investor protection advocates. The reason why this is a really big deal is that NASA took a fragmented, fast-growing, under-regulated outlet of financial advice for consumers and brought its education requirements in line with the educational standards imposed on professionals. From an investor's perspective, the rule closed a trust gap that's existed in securities sales since before Wall Street started in the 1920s. For decades, almost anyone could call themselves a professional financial advisor by opening an RIA, or merely going through a small amount of studying and paperwork to register as an IA rep. And for decades, consumers had little choice but to assume that anyone calling themselves a government-regulated investment advisor must be required to maintain some sort of professional mastery. Of course, that assumption was not true. NASA has created a highly efficient CE regulatory system suited to the needs of regulators and consumers. When you complete the required 12 credits in ethics and professional responsibility and products and practice annually required, your FinPro transcript will show it. Regulators can view your credit completion records without asking you for a stack of certificates. Clients who inquire can be told plainly that your record is verified within the registration infrastructure. The promise of fiduciary duty now looks less like an unfounded claim and more like a measurable routine you can demonstrate to consumers with hard data. It is worth clarifying what IAR status is and is not. An IAR is a registration category. It is not a degree and not a professional designation. It is the doorway into the financial advice business, but it's not a credential. For that reason, it's best not to list the letters IAR after your name on your business cards, as though it is a professional credential you earned in school. That said, the introduction of credible, uniform education requirements establishes a minimum standard of annual education needed to call yourself an investment fiduciary. And it's a standard that must be met every year, and that is maintained by a third-party CE provider. 6 hours must be in classes about ethics and professional responsibility. In addition, 6 hours must be about products and practice. Credits do not carry forward. Everyone starts fresh on January 1st. The two categories essentially divide an IA rep's job in two parts. Ethics and professional responsibility is one part, and it's about judgment, disclosure, honesty, conflicts. Supervision and accountability. Ethics and professional responsibility CE is about your behavior, whether you should do something and how to do it without misleading clients or violating rules. It's the how-to behind always putting the client's interests ahead of your own interests. It's about doing ethical stuff. In contrast, products and practice cover technical details. It is not about doing, it is about planning to do stuff. The other category of class is products and practice CE. This is about techniques in planning for retirement and minimizing taxes. It's about managing risk, communicating, handling data safely, and operating systems to improve investment and financial planning processes. Product practice CE is about how to execute plans and implementing advice. Together, these two categories encompass what good advice requires. Dividing required topics into these two categories may sound benign, but it's definitely not. Bifurcating IAR CE topics this way has a huge impact on training financial professionals and, more importantly, consumer protection. It's almost diabolical what NASA has done. Divvying up required IAR CE topics into these two categories places much greater emphasis on training in ethics and professional responsibility. Think about it. A CFP is required to take CFP Board's 2-hour ethics class every 2 years. That's equivalent to 1 hour of ethics training per year. In contrast, NASA is requiring 6 hours. NASA has imposed a 600% increase in ethics training annually over what's required of CFPs. It's astonishing. NASAA's 6-hour annual ethics and professional responsibility requirement is 3 times the 2 hours required by most state CPA boards of accountancy, according to publicly available data I compiled using ChatGPT. Thus, NASA has imposed a 300% increase in ethics and professional responsibility training on CPAs. To be clear, NASA has mandated an astonishing increase in ethics training for all certified financial planners and CPA financial planning professionals, as well as investment advisor reps. It is a watershed in American financial history. Interestingly, by the way, this story has not been in the headlines at the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or FT in the last 5 years, as far as I can tell. Okay, let's get into the details. Let's start with the requirement that all IAR CE classes